It's a first, possibly second century statue of Heracles. Or, you know, the scale of it is over life size. You know, its enormity is really fantastic. We can see where quite naturally there's pieces missing here, but the hair around here has really survived very well. All of the abdominal muscles here, the muscles around the side, the imposing chest, the fact that it's kind of lunging forward. Wow, you know, where the head of the statue originally would have been up here, and the arms out here, and this leg down here. This would have been a statue of absolutely incredible proportions. To me, I just thought that it was absolutely fantastic, and just had to have it, really. Well, I think my addiction to collecting just went absolutely ballistic with antiquities, and I was mounting them up in storage. You know, I was sort of buying them and just kept going and going and going. And then after, you know, several years, I ended up with literally hundreds and hundreds of items in storage. So I had a chap to a friend of mine, Mark Moroney, who was still is actually chief editor of Minerva magazine. I said, look, I've got this massive collection of items here, you know, that I'm thinking of just putting in a room and putting on display. You know, do you think people will be interested in seeing them? And he took a look at the inventory, and he, you know, just couldn't believe it. And he said, you know, this is sort of a world-class collection you built here. You know, I mean, you could have a museum. Like, people wouldn't just walk past this stuff; they'd pay to see it. We then asked a variety of other people in the industry, and they looked at the collection as well, and they said absolutely, you know, you could make some really interesting displays with these things. And I've been collecting various artworks with classical themes as well, and then having a museum where you could see how classical antiquities had affected artists all the way from the Renaissance all the way through to actually contemporary artists to today. The museum has gained notoriety because we have made these, you know, extremely interesting connections between the ancient antiquities and ancient art and modern art, and the way that we've done the design of the museum really lends itself to teaching people that connection. Because there's actually very few artists in the last 300 or 400 years that have not been influenced by the classics, either very directly, obviously, in the Renaissance and Baroque period, to much less directly when we talk about artists like Damien Hirst, you know, Mark Quinn, for example, or when you get back into the mid-20th century and we start talking about Yves Klein, Warhol, Dali, etc., all had classical periods. Yeah, you know, the British Museum must be about 3 or 4 years ago now, had a display of contemporary artists' works there, and they had a large group of these spin-painted plastic skulls by Damien Hirst, of which this is a perfect example by Damien Hirst of one of his spin-painted plastic skulls. So it was skulls almost exactly like this, and certainly this form, by Damien Hirst, that were in the British Museum during that exhibit. So that's really the connection there. Now, so it's not classic in itself, but there's the connection with the British Museum, and we have it in a display cabinet where we have a Roman bronze head of Apollo and a Roman bronze head of Augustus. So to have this in the same cabinet, where you see sort of the three heads together, is, we thought, made a good juxtaposition. But no, you know, trading the markets is something that I think, if you're going to do it successfully over the years, is something where you really actually have to take the emotion out of trading. You know, when things are going well, you have to keep your emotions very low and under control, because you never know whether the next day things are going to go badly. And when things are going badly, you know, you'll be miserable, but you have to not get too miserable and continue doing your analysis and researching trades and researching markets and trying to find good opportunities. And so even though the markets go like this, you know, you have to keep your emotions just doing that. I mean, otherwise you'll never be successful in the markets, and you'll just drive yourself crazy, basically. Well, collecting art and things is generally only a positive emotion, because you get really excited when you find something that you really want to buy and that you know you think is fantastic, and so it's constantly like trying to, you know, be on a sort of treasure hunt that never really ends, and every now and again you keep finding a new pot of treasure, and that's the extremely exciting, you know, thing about it. And you know, you find something, you think, wow, that's amazing, let's take a closer look at that. And if it's something that's really important, you know, we need to do some research on that and get some advice from some experts, and then, you know, all that part of collecting can be fascinating as well. And of course, you're adding to your own general knowledge. I mean, every time you buy a new item, or every time you see something in a catalogue, you know, and you read the description, you know, you learn something new. And so it's a constant process of sort of educating yourself, collecting as well, which is also quite exciting. You know, actually, I think collecting is an escape from the markets. You know, it's something pleasant to do, and it's a hobby. And of course it's quite expensive, so to say the least, at certain levels, although actually collecting doesn't have to be expensive. It depends what you collect and what level in the market, of course. You know, ancient battles were so violent and vicious, and you know, it's just impossible, I think, in this day and age to put yourself, you know, in the position of the people on the battlefield in the, you know, back then, and just how extraordinary ancient battles were, all the way from, you know, pre-Christ all the way up to sort of, you know, medieval Europe. I don't know, there's just something that's very haunting and emotional about ancient weaponry, actually, and blood-curdling. And I think that appeals to a lot of men and boys, actually, and it certainly appeals to me. My parents were never really interested in art. We never visited art museums, ever. But we used to visit museums of sort of antiques, antiquities, and we visited a lot of churches and a lot of castles. That was really their thing. I don't know, I only went to a very ordinary school, and I left school when I was 18. I didn't go to university. So yeah, I became more captivated, I think, on the art side. You know, I was really interested in looking at the antiquities, of course, in the Louvre, and I've been fascinated with the British Museum as a child. But I hadn't really spent any time wandering around galleries of Dutch or Flemish old masters, for example. And so the more time that I spent in the Louvre, the more I began to sort of understand art and the history of you know, kind of medieval Europe. I mean, in school in England, you learn so much about medieval England, but you don't really learn much about medieval Europe, what was going on in Italy in the 16th century, etc. You know, and you can discover a lot by looking at artworks in museums like the Louvre and spending a lot of time in each gallery, and then doing a bit of reading on those artists, and that I started to find, you know, really fascinating.